Hello, my name is Andres Estrada, and I currently serve as chairman of the LCC Board of Directors. I'd like to thank you for taking the time to join us today for our Latin Chamber Symposium with the topic of the economic impact of Latinos in America. Before we continue with our program, I welcome you to join me in saying the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. I would also like to take a moment to thank the LCC staff and president of the LCC, Peter Guzman, for organizing today's event. Peter Guzman and staff continue to stay very active, working for the business community and working to communicate to our members and public in general with vital information provided by our partners in the state and local level, as well as our business leaders related to updates on COVID, grant opportunities, and so much more. Our commitment has consistently been to impact the social and political fabric of Southern Nevada through economic empowerment. Follow us on our social channels for more information on upcoming virtual events, as well as important news and updates as related to the business community of Southern Nevada. The LCC is here working for you and your success. And now we continue with the Latin Chamber Symposium series.
Wow. Chairman Estrada, as usual, thank you again for all your volunteer work on the board as chairman of the board of directors. It's amazing working with you, and thank you for opening us up to this Latin Chamber Symposium 2021, our first signature event of the year, and we're very excited. As you know, we always try to bring you high-level, important information from the people that know. And today, what an honor. I mean, we're talking about the big leagues here. And I'm just so proud to be able to have the kind of relationships with Bank of America who helps put these kind of things together for our community. I'm grateful to Bank of America for helping me with this one because I know how important this is. This is the economic impact of Latinos in America. We know how impactful we are, but you're gonna hear it, you're gonna see it, you're gonna feel it. So with that, I am honored and proud to introduce our first guest, Dr. Feenup. Dr. Feenup, how are you?
Peter, I'm awesome. Thanks so much for having me. It is great to be here and really great to share this exciting story that David and I are going to share today.
Yeah. So, no need to even wait. I'm excited to see these numbers, to see this, get this information that I know is going to be impactful for all of us.
Terrific. So just as a quick matter of introduction, my name is Matthew Feenup. I'm an economist at the Center for Economic Research and Forecasting at California Lutheran University. I also happen to be the chief economist for the Latino GDP Project and have the tremendous privilege of working with Dr. David Hayes Bautista and two other researchers on this incredible project. The Center for Economic Research and Forecasting is a nationally recognized forecast center. We are members of the Wall Street Journal Economic Forecasting Survey, and actually have won national forecasting awards a number of times over the last few years. Now, for me, as sort of a numbers guy, as an economic forecaster and a data geek, this being a part of this project is really a dream come true because what we get to do, first of all, is use data to tell an incredibly compelling story about members of our community, members of our nation, and also to tell a story that is really timely, right? The last 11 months have been extraordinary in terms of the collapse of economic activity as a result of the pandemic. And the truth is we need hope, right, as we look to the year ahead. And I'm here to say that the Latinos in the United States are a tremendous source of hope now more than ever. They're an extraordinary engine of economic growth in the United States. And we actually believe that the pandemic is making that more true than ever. Now, before I jump into the numbers and just tell you how amazing this story is, I want to give my esteemed colleague, Dr. David Hayes Bautista, a moment to introduce himself and to talk about how this research started.
Thank you so much, Matthew. I'm David Hayes Bautista. I am Distinguished Professor of Medicine and Director of the Center for the Study of Latino Health and Culture at UCLA, where I am a basic scientist within the Division of General Internal Medicine. And I have been very pleased to work with Matthew and his colleagues at California Lutheran to share this exciting story, which is part of the overall health of the country, the health of the state, the health of populations, the Latino GDP. Back to you, Matthew.
Thank you. All right, so before we get into some numbers, I sort of want to talk about what it is that we're doing and why we're doing it. And so this report, the 2020 LDC US Latino GDP report, seeks to provide a factual view of the large and rapidly growing economic contribution of Latinos living in the United States. We estimate the US Latino GDP based on a detailed bottom-up construction which leverages publicly available data from major US agencies. So why the GDP? Now, first of all, we chose the GDP as a calculation to perform. First of all, because it's a broad measure of direct economic activity. And second, and maybe more importantly, we understand that GDP is a near universally accepted summary statistic for the performance of an economy. GDP is a figure that's reported by the government, at least quarterly, breathlessly reported by business journals and others in traditional news media, understood by business leaders and political leaders. And so really, we think this is a great way to tell the story of the economic contribution of Latinos. Now, as a summary statistic for the performance of Latinos in the United States, the Latino GDP is truly impressive. Now, total economic output of Latinos is very large. In fact, it was $2.6 trillion in 2018, the most recent year for which we have data. US Latino GDP is growing rapidly. In fact, as I'm going to show you, it's not only noteworthy for its size, it is truly noteworthy for its growth. And so the total economic contribution of Latinos grew 72% faster than non-Latinos over the period from 2010 to 2018. Now, the single biggest driver of the Latino GDP is rising consumption. From 2010 to 2018, Latino real consumption grew 133% faster than non-Latino consumption in the United States. Now, to take one more big step back, and again, to talk about what we are, I mentioned that our goal with this research is to provide a factual view of the tremendous economic contribution of Latinos, but also it's to produce a bulletproof estimate using a transparent methodology, right? So that we have a number that we can really stand behind. We're using the same tools that the Bureau of Economic Analysis uses in order to estimate US GDP. We're using the same methodology, and we are detailing economic activity literally across 70 categories of expenditures and 70 industry sectors. And so this is a detailed bottom-up construction of Latino economic activity. So now I mentioned already, Latino GDP is large, it's growing rapidly. It's driven in many ways by growth in Latino consumption. And I said 2.6 trillion, but really what does $2.6 trillion mean? Well, if Latinos in the United States were their own economy, a discrete economy, it turns out that that Latino GDP would be the 8th largest economy in the entire world. Wow. As you can see here, 2.6 trillion, it would be larger than the GDPs of Italy, Brazil, South Korea, Russia, and a number of other really, really, really big countries around the world. 8th largest in the world. Now, I mentioned that it's noteworthy even more for its growth. So imagine this. So among those 10 largest GDPs in the world that we listed on the previous slide, the Latino GDP from 2017 to 2018 was the single fastest growing. In fact, it grew 20% faster than the GDP of India and 30% faster than the GDP of China. So this is an incredible story of economic growth, especially in the most recent year for which we have data from 2017 to 2018. The economic contribution of Latinos grew 72% faster than non-Latinos for the entire period from 2010 to 2018, and nearly 350% faster than the GDP of non-Latinos over this period. Now, I mentioned already that the single largest driver of rapid Latino GDP growth since 2010 is personal consumption. From 2010 to 2018, Latino real consumption grew 133% faster than non-Latino consumption. During the most recent year, Latino consumption grew 9 times faster. This dramatic increase is driven by large gains in personal income. And those gains in personal income naturally flow from Latinos' rapid gains in educational attainment and strong labor force participation. That is rapid human capital accumulation. That's the story here, the growth of human capital among Latinos. Now, what's the effect of that accumulation of human capital? Well, whereas the US had average wage and salary growth of just 5.1% over the previous 5 years, wage and salary growth for Latinos was 8.6%. Gains in educational attainment are a huge part of the growth of Latino incomes. From 2010 to 2018, growth in the number of people with a bachelor's degree or higher was 2.6 times more rapid among Latinos than non-Latinos. And labor force participation, work ethic is a big part of this story. Latino labor force participation in 2018, again, the most recent year for which we have data in this report, was 67.7%, more than 5 percentage points higher than non-Latinos. Now, what I've just highlighted in these last few statistics on consumption, income growth, educational attainment, and work ethic, labor force participation, these are sort of the individual level characteristics that are driving the dramatic performance of Latinos in the US economy. Now, on top of that, there are some population dynamics that are force multipliers that really accelerate this trend. And population is one of these. Population growth among Latinos is 7 times faster than non-Latinos. So population growth is a big part of this. So is household formation. Latinos provide a very large and positive demographic punch through the addition of new households. The number of Latino households grew 23.2% from 2010 to 2018, while the number of non-Latino households grew only 3.8%, 23.2 versus 3.8%. Now, to an economist, the growth of households is critically important, right? Because it's vital to economic growth, and it's a 1-2 punch for economic contribution, because adding households increases current economic activity, and it also increases future economic activity. So this is sort of the gift that keeps on giving to an economy, and it's a big part of the demographic story of Latinos. Now, another factor is age distribution. Latinos are significantly younger on average than non-Latinos. Median age of Latinos is just 29.5% compared to 40.6% of non-Latinos. And what's important about these age demographics is that it actually means that Latinos are making very strong contributions to the critically important demographic segment, which is working age adults. By 2060, Latinos are projected to contribute 30 million additional working age adults. And that's not just something we're talking about in the future. This is a trend that has been an important part of the US economic story for years. In fact, despite being about 18% of the US population, Latinos are responsible for nearly 80% of the growth of the US labor force since the Great Recession. So this addition of working age adults has been an important part of the economic recovery story from the Great Recession, and it will become even more important in the year ahead. Now, the importance of labor force growth cannot be overstated. In fact, according to the Federal Reserve, we are standing at the edge of a demographic precipice as a country. In fact, it's expected that over the next 2 years, the retirement of mostly non-Latino baby boomers will accelerate, reaching its peak in actually at the end of next year, end of 2022, less than 2 years from now. At that time, the Federal Reserve predicts that every single month, 350,000 baby boomers will be leaving the US labor force every single month. Now, our listeners are not that far from Southern California. To give you a sense about the size, that's the population of the city of Anaheim in Orange County, retiring from the US labor force every single month. And so that's to say the decline of the US labor force is a huge problem, and it actually threatens the ability of the US to even produce modest economic growth. Now, fortunately, facing this demographic precipice, we are fortunate that Latinos are already contributing so strongly to the US labor force and will do so even more importantly in the years and months ahead. Now, in this report, we are, because we're using publicly available data using the same tools as the Bureau of Economic Analysis does to estimate economic activity, we're constrained in that the most recent year for which all of these estimates are produced is 2018. Obviously, sitting here right now in the 11th month of the pandemic and the economic recession that followed, it's natural to ask, well, goodness, 2018, that's an incredible story, but what's happening right now and what do we expect in the future? And one of the great news that's embedded in this report is that the importance of Latinos has increased during these trying times. So the family values, the hard work, and the persistence. By the way, those are all of the characteristics, those are sort of the most American characteristics, right? The things we associate with being American. The family values, hard work, and persistence of Latinos are not only an engine of economic growth, they're a bright spot during this extraordinary year of economic upheaval. So early evidence from the coronavirus recession of last year indicate that Latinos will be a driver of economic recovery. Monthly data shows that after a dramatic contraction of the US labor force, resulting from government mandated shutdowns in March, Latino labor force rebounded strongly. From April to June, as government mandated closures were beginning to lift, Latino labor force participation soared at a rate more than double the rate of non-Latinos. So as economists, we've always been asked, what's the shape of the recovery? Are we going to get a prolonged, slow U-shaped recovery? Are we going to get a rapid V-shaped recovery? We see evidence of a rapid V-shaped recovery in one segment of the economy, and that is the Latino segment of the economy. Now, using the financial crisis and Great Recession as a reference point, we expect the gap between the Latino and non-Latino labor force participation to widen during the recovery. And we expect Latino perseverance and hard work to once again be a source of resiliency for the US economy. Now, during the darkest days of the financial crisis and the Great Recession, the gap between Latino and non-Latino labor force participation surged, increasing 50% from 2005 to 2009. And then that gap widened every year continuously from 2010 to 2018. And this correlates strongly with the growth of the Latino GDP. And it points to what we expect following this current crisis. And so that's to say, one more time, Latinos are one of the economy's biggest growth engines. And we already see evidence that the pandemic is making this even more true than ever. And Latinos will once again be a driver of economic recovery as we begin to climb out of the current recession. And so with that, now I invite my colleague, Dr. Hayes Bautista, to provide even more context on what these numbers mean and what we can expect in the months and years ahead. Dr. Hayes Bautista.
Well, thank you, Matthew, for giving us that really concise, very detailed description of the Latino GDP. Now let's look into the future, if we can peek around the corner. Some people have wondered, well, this sounds well and good, this Latino GDP, but we hear about how Latinos are not faring well, what with COVID-19. Was all of this that Matthew just talked about a hothouse flower? Is that going to have disappeared already? What's going to happen into the future? Well, we like to look at very long-term trends. So I'm taking some data from a book I published about 4 years ago, looking at long-term trends from 1940 to the present. And what has been consistent is that these characteristics of Latino GDP have weathered all sorts of things, recessions, wars, civil upheavals. Nonetheless, the Latino GDP has been powering through for decades. For example, recessions. We're coming out of one. We've had a number in this economy before. Recessions seem to be an ongoing feature of American life. Down here in the blue boxes, we have the different post-World War II recessions, 1948, 1958, 1973, 1980, 1990, 2000, 2007. And you'll notice that from 1940 up to 2015, in fact, Latino male labor force participation continued to be the highest of any group. And again, we saw that trend through the Latino GDP. We've had wars, World War II, you name it. In fact, we've had World War II, the Korean War, the Vietnam War, the Gulf War, and now our Middle East and Iraq and Afghanistan. Wars are very disruptive. People go off into the armed forces, creating shortages here and there. Nonetheless, the formation of Latino households has continued to be at the highest rate of any group in California from 1940 to 2015. And by the way, this is nothing new. Latino participation in America's wars go back to 1776 with the War of Independence, but that's another story. And during the American Civil War, Latinos in Nevada, in Virginia City, were celebrating the Cinco de Mayo as part of the Latino experience of the American Civil War. But that's another story. We'll hold that for Cinco de Mayo. There have been civil upheavals. My parents remember the Zoot Suit riots. Up through the last year's Black Lives Matter demonstrations. So we've had the Zoot Suit riots down here at the bottom, Operation Wetback, the Long Hot Summers, the English Only Movement, the Rodney King, Prop 187, Prop 227. These are California Prop 187, anti-immigrant, Prop 227, anti-bilingual education, Black Lives Matter, and then COVID. Talk about upheavals. Nonetheless, as we look at the growth of Latino-owned businesses throughout the country, those numbers have just continued to rise and rise and rise, getting close almost to geometrical, almost. But clearly Latino businesses survive whatever war gets thrown out. So that's why we are of the opinion that actually the US Latino GDP will begin refueling the recovery in the post-pandemic recovery. Matthew already went through the month-by-month Latino labor force participation rate, where we did see the V-shape occurring in the Latino labor force participation. That's one of the metrics that we've been looking at month by month. Another one that we look at month by month are the remittances to Mexico. These are data from 1995 to 2020, and it took almost a decade for those remittances to hit $1 billion. That happened shortly after 2000. The remittances to Mexico went up to $2 billion actually during the 2007-2009 Great Recession. You notice during those 3 years, remittances were over $2 billion. Obviously, people are worried about the folks back home. Then they dropped back down and didn't hit $3 billion until about 2018. And then suddenly, in the space of 2 years, in fact, in the space of nearly a month, broke the $4 billion per month margin. So here we look at the last year from November 2019 to September of 2020. And you notice that in March, when everything shut down and people were out of work and businesses closed, Latino remittances to Mexico for the very first time went over 4 billion. Now, for me, this implies some sort of resiliency. There's some sort of reserve that Latinos have to call upon when times get tough. A lot of economists were predicting that remittances would drop. They thought this would be the first thing that Latino households would stop doing. They were predicting economic collapse in Mexico, Central America, hunger, you name it. And in fact, just the opposite occurred. The remittances did drop to the $3 billion per month level, which would have been a high, and then bounced back up again and have been around about $3.5 billion per month ever since then. Now, this, again, for me, is some sort of sign of resilience. I'm looking very carefully. How long can this happen? And if these remittances do drop off, then I will say, ooh, we're in trouble. We maybe have hit the limit of Latino resilience. So far, that has not been hit. This is a very, very optimistic population. And even in the midst of the COVID, new Latino-owned businesses have been cropping up. But here is an interesting datum from the Public Policy Institute of California survey that they did just last December, asking the question about optimism. When children today in California grow up, do you think they'll be better off or worse off financially than their parents? And Latinos, 52% said yes. Non-Hispanic whites, only 23%. That is, Latinos are expressing twice the level of optimism about the future. And this optimism obviously will drive the formation of new businesses, labor force participation, new households, etc. And these all build on a very healthy foundation. COVID-19, to the contrary, has to deal with the fact that Latinos tend to be very, very healthy. As we look at these data from 2017 nationally, Latinos simply have here in yellow about 30% fewer heart diseases compared to non-Hispanic white, about 30% fewer cancers compared to white, about 40% fewer unintentional injuries, and about 60% fewer chronic lower respiratory diseases. And again, stereotypes to the contrary, Latinos are less likely to use tobacco compared to non-Hispanic white, less likely to use alcohol compared to non-Hispanic white, all of which translates into an over 3-year longer life expectancy. Now, I just turned 75 a couple of months ago. Let me tell you right now, those 3 extra years look mighty good. You have heard Viva la Raza, right? There it is. So here we have going off into the future. That's why we are very confident that the Latino GDP and the behaviors and values behind that will help power through and refuel the post-pandemic recovery. And just one last thing to remember, while all the focus has been on immigrant Latinos and immigrant Latinos without all the proper documentation, the fact is the younger generations, particularly 20 and younger, are about 97% US citizen. The immigrants are more prominent in the older middle-aged population. So the ones entering the labor force that Matthew was talking about are 97% US citizens with very high levels of education. And they will take this world's 8th largest GDP that their largely immigrant parents created for them, and they can take it way off into the future, depending upon the investments that the states and this country chooses to make in them. So once again, thanks to Bank of America for helping us share with you our conviction that the Latino GDP truly will be refueling the American post-pandemic recovery. Thank you very much.
Hello, everyone. Hope you're enjoying this LCC virtual luncheon, bringing you a packed information and real important information. I'm just blown away with some of the information we've already heard today. And we're going to keep it going. I have the honor and pleasure of introducing the head of digital at Bank of America. It's a big deal. Our friend David Tyree is here. David, welcome.
Oh, thank you so much, Peter. Really nice to be here with you, and thanks for making time for me.
No, thank you for making time. Evidently, you're pretty busy with being head of digital at Bank of America. I can only imagine. So, tell us, what does that mean? What is it, and what do you got for us?
Sure, I'd love to. And maybe what I do is give you a quick overview, Peter, of kind of the way we think about digital in today's world. Maybe show you some of the changes that have gone on through this pandemic and some of the lessons learned. And then I can, you and I can kind of have some back and forth on it. So I'm going to start with a story because it's really the philosophy of how we approach digital here, Peter. We were doing focus groups across the country. And we had planned on doing like 20 of these focus groups. We were looking for what is it that we could do as a financial institution to maintain a lifelong relationship with the customers, right? That's the holy grail, be lifelong relationship. It's
right.
A relationship game, right? We got like 6 focus groups in and we weren't getting anywhere. People are like, oh, have better pricing, answer your phones better, et cetera, et cetera. And I was getting kind of frustrated, to be honest with you. And I said, let's pack it in, folks, and we'll go back home and see what we can do with the information we got. And somebody said, let's do this last one in Houston, Texas. So we went into this last one, 14 people behind the glass mirror. They're there for free coffee and donuts, right? And we were getting nowhere again. And about 35, 40 minutes into this elder gentleman on the side turns to the audience the group of people in the room and says, anybody in this room know what percentage of time a rocket is on track to hit the moon? And people are like,
Wow.
what is he talking about, right? And he goes, 3% of the time. He goes, 97% of the time, a rocket is off track. Too many variables, too many unknowns. You can't actually see what your destination is. And he goes, that's why NASA built mission control. Because from the time you start and you launch that rocket to the time it comes back, it's a constant course correction. And then he kind of put his eyes towards the mirror and said, you people in financial services, all you want to do is put me in a rocket and hit a green button. If you want my lifelong relationship, you better be mission control. And so we walked away from that saying, wow, this is a very different world we live in. And it was just one of those aha moments for me personally that's out there. So
that's powerful. That's actually powerful.
Let me share with you, a couple slides that'll kind of get the juices flowing here. When we think about the digital strategy and how we transferred that in, let me see if I can get this going. What we did was we said, look, our strategy has to be personalized and comprehensive, right? So that means make it for you, Peter, and make it across all your financial service needs. And if we do that, we fundamentally believe we can compete against other big banks. We can compete against fintechs. We can compete about big tech who are new entrants into this space. And we also pointed out we have very unique capabilities to combine with our digital properties. We have a physical network, 4,300 financial centers across the United States, 16,000 plus ATM machines. We have a philosophy of never, ever turn over access to our customers. We're here for you as your banking relationship. We're not here to sell ad space or sell impressions or anything like that. And last but not least, our job as that mission control is to give you the big picture so that you can do those course corrections. We do this by having one entry point. I call it the 10 apps in one. You can virtually, through one mobile app, get to Merrill Lynch, to your checking account, to your mortgage, to better money habits, to learn about things. And we've also added, first mover in the industry, this assistant, 24/7 assistant called Erica across the board. So that becomes an AI-driven experience that's personalized for you, Peter, right? So when we think about it, we have really positioned ourselves in a way that is taking advantage some of the core drivers. Now, for you and the chamber here, these things don't just apply to Bank of America, right? It's be focused on client solutions. Don't push products. Don't be the person putting them in a rocket and hitting go and walking away. So that becomes one of our advantages, is centering the whole organization. Where you can, be a first mover. So we were first mover with the whole AI Erica engine in financial services. You got to make sure that you're focused on an experience and a goal that somebody has, not just what their past behavior is. So we created something called Life Plan that allows us to say, hey, Peter, what's important to you? And you may say, well, family and home and work are really important. So we gear our experience around those things. So it's not just, oh, Peter pays a mortgage and therefore let's put this information up. It's about forward-looking info. And then last but not least, full suite of solutions, and where we can and where we think, hey, we have an advantage, we build it proprietary. We don't outsource. So Erica, our AI engine, Life Plan, the digital mortgage experience, Edge, those are all built in-house for us. So we think we're positioned pretty well going forward. But I also want to point something out that I think is very relevant for this crowd as well, which is it's not just about building something and hoping they will come. Digital is now lockstep and almost inseparable with marketing, right? Because it's critically important that, if you put up a website and people go to it to see their account balances in financial services, that doesn't save the bank any money. That's not that much easier, convenient, and safe for customers. You have to create these capabilities and drive it. So we call that digital adoption. I'll give you two examples. Erica right now, we have 18 million people actively using Erica. 18 million people who are engaged that. It's growing at almost 70% a year. Our Zelle person-to-person payment right now, the whole Zelle network, there are 5,000 banks plus in that Zelle network. That Zelle network actually is twice as much as the Venmo network as far as volume going through. And Bank of America alone, because we've driven our customers' awareness of, we have Zelle, here's how to use it, here's where it works, what it doesn't work. We're actually 1/3 the entire Zelle network. So that means that just Bank of America alone is 62% of Venmo's volume. So driving the experience is critically important. And that's why on the right-hand side here, you see that we win a bunch of awards because we're focused on that client experience part of it. I want to mention something, and this will probably stir up a little controversy here, Peter, but knowing your audience, I figured I'd throw it in there. I always get asked by fintechs about fintechs and threats and things. One, I respect every player, big and small, who enters into the financial service spectrum. It's complicated, it's regulated, it's fraught with issues, et cetera. So I respect everybody who comes into the formula. When I think about fintech firms, they have solved one pain point. They have said, well, we'll create a new user experience that's easy to come on board, et cetera, et cetera. And I watch them every day. We have a whole team that focuses on fintechs. And we learn from them and we look at what pain point did they solve and can we replicate that, et cetera. The question for fintechs is, can they take that one pain point and make it a full business model? Some have been pretty good at that. A lot have not, right? But just to put it in comparison, if you take somebody like a Chime with 4 million customers, look, Zelle, I've got 13 million people using Zelle.
Wow.
That's just one feature within our site. So it kind of puts it in perspective, capacity, right, on that side. So, so last couple slides for you, Peter, and then we can kind of dive in questions. This one is also relevant for your audience and anybody who's running a business who has a digital presence. Think about, to my rocket analogy there. You're the pilot in that rocket. You have an earpiece in and you're listening to mission control. What do you want mission control to be telling you? You want mission control to be feeding you relevant and timely information. I don't want to be in there and fearing a shutter in the rocket and the mission control guy going, hey, look, off the left-hand side, it's Australia, check it out, right? I don't want that, right? I want relevant and timely. I want them to say, here's your next best step. And I want them to give me a choice of having that best next step. And if I do those things, then you're actually fulfilling your mission of mission control and you're acting in the customer's best interest on that side. So that's our philosophy. We have taken the hundreds of different mobile apps and websites and we're now converging them into one and we're leveraging personalization. So Peter, you might be a Merrill Lynch customer. And when you come in, you don't go to a Merrill Lynch application anymore. You come to the Bank of America app. We understand who you are and we pull the right content together for you. And we're now able to, because we're doing it that way, we're able to do one thing in one area and allow it to be used across the firm. We're now, in the really cool position of, we put out about 1,500 new features every year to our digital properties. We are actually doing releases now every 23 to 28 days. Think back, banks 3 years ago, we were doing 4 a year. Once a quarter. And we've discovered something called the 90-day rule, which means if I brought you on, Peter, as a new customer of Bank of America, and I get you within the first 90 days to try 2 features, let's say mobile check deposit, take a picture of your check so you don't have to go to an ATM or a financial center deposit, and send some money to Dan via Zelle. If I get you to do 2 features, 97% chance that you will be digitally active a year from now.
Wow.
So it's about onboarding, right? So these are all basics at that stage. So our mission in a nutshell is that our vision is that no matter where you are, who you are, what your life priorities, the complexity of your needs or the level of wealth, we're going to take all those components across Bank of America and personalize an experience so that we can act in your best interest.
That's fantastic.
All right.
That is fantastic. Wow, great information. I mean, just the whole process that you took us through, that's pretty amazing. In fact, it helps me understand now even more when I go on my Bank of America app, which I do. You know, I want the audience to know who we're talking to. So I'm just interested briefly in your journey. How did you, you know, get to Bank of America, and how did you become head of digital?
Sure, sure. I think it's an obsession with focusing on the customer. You know, I've always prided myself on trying to tackle the hard problems or things that have been broken. And at Bank of America, neither one of those things were true with our digital experience. We have a long, long history of 10 years plus of constant investment into our digital platforms. Prior to taking over digital, I ran the product organization, right? So it was all about, you know, those rockets and hitting green buttons, but that was also a long time ago, right? And what I saw was the writing on the wall about this notion of it's about managing the customer experience end to end, and digital was by far, you know, the obvious. This is the future of banking, and so I headed in that direction across the board. I have a long background starting from time I graduated college, focused on, you know, financial service firms. So I've known nothing other than trying to take care of other people's money, whether it be in their retirement plans or whether it be, you know, in their wealth management accounts or their banking accounts. And the digital experience brings it all together. So it was a natural for me.
That's excellent. You know, obviously, got to touch on this. We know that there's a pandemic that we all been dealing with, and certainly my audience of small business community and others. How has that pandemic changed how your clients are doing banking?
Yeah. So I think banking, and I would argue, Peter, no matter what business, you know, your small business owners are in, fundamentally, it always boils down to easy, convenient, and safe wins the day, right? And so if you can deliver on those things, you got something, right, on that side. And so, you know, what the pandemic has done is change the paradigm on the easy and convenient side of things. As an example, our mobile check deposits, take a picture of that, right? You know, that's a simple, easy feature. When I pick up my phone, I, you know, click it and it goes right into my account and all is good. Well, if you're Bank of America with 67 million customers, you got a lot of customers who are baby boomers who, you know, changing their habits is pretty tough. Well, the pandemic actually force multiplier on those changes. And what we did was we said, hey, right as this thing started hit, we said, wow, there are going to be a lot of people who haven't tried things. So let's go out and educate our frontline associates on our digital capabilities so that if you called Peter and said, hey, I've never done this before, how do I do it? Walk them through it, simple as can be. You do it once and they don't go back. So it was interesting because the hardest population to change behavior are those boomers. But when we came to new digital customers and during the April, May, when the pandemic first hit, 24% were boomers. So, you know, it just forced change.
Yeah, forced change.
And we were there because it was easy and it's convenient and it's safe. And so, and it hasn't gone back. That's the big surprise. I expected a lot of these things to, you know, go rocket up and then they go back to normal. Well, we're not back to normal anyway, but it stayed. And now they're trying new things.
Yeah. I'm curious because I know how, you know, I understand the Hispanic community. Sometimes they're, you know, a little fearful of the digital. I'm just wondering, how has that been going on, the digital engagement with the Hispanic customers? What do you see there?
Yeah, we're pretty psyched about that whole topic because we, of the, you know, roughly 40 million digitally active users, 8 million of Bank of America's digitally active users are Hispanic, right?
Wow.
We by far the lead there. Now, we've been doing for a decade, our online platform was both in English and in Spanish. So we kind of had a lead back then, but we've also now made it a an operating principle that what we don't do is develop something and then release it and then come back and do translation and those type of things. We do them simultaneously, right? And then we provide the client choice on which way do you want to go, and that's what it's really all about. I'll give you an example. Our life plan, which is that ability for us to collect what's important to you. We launched it in October. I gotta confess that I made an error, because when my boss asked me, okay, how many of these life plans do you think you're going to open by the end of the year, October to December? I said 500,000. We opened 2 million.
Wow.
And that was fully integrated. And a big driver of that was because we did it in both English and Spanish on that side. So it was a really good proof point for us on that side. But, we're proud to say that, that's our commitment, is to serve every one of our clients, regardless of who they are or how they want to interact with us. And we've got the machine kind of kicking into high gear here. I will tell you that if you looked at the statistics, on a piece of paper, our, Latino population, when you think about digital usage, I'll give you just a couple examples. I got to read them off. We have more Hispanic for mobile check deposit. We have more Hispanic for Erica. We have more Hispanic for Zelle, more Hispanic for digital active. This is all, if you did an apples to apples comparison. So a lot of effort goes into it, though.
No, I could tell a lot of effort goes into it, and the results speak for themselves. I'm just curious, because for me, listen, I grab my phone, I click a button, the Bank of America, and I'm on mobile, right? I want to know what's going on behind that. Like, what is the size and scale of that? Is it you?
It's not me. It's not me. So let me give you a sense of scale. It'll be a little bit mind blowing, but Bank of America Consumer Bank alone, just one part of the organization, has 10 billion customer interactions a year. 10 billion customer interactions. So 500 million people walk into our financial centers. 500 million people roughly call us on the phone, and 9 billion are interacting digitally. 9 billion interactions digitally on that.
That's an unbelievable number.
Right. So that's kind of the scope of this. You're looking at, almost 1 billion logins, close to 1 billion logins a month of people interacting on this side. We have broken the organization into really two components. One is our technical side of things, which are the people who maintain, our digital properties, everything from servers to, coding pieces, to really what we call the digital, line of business, which are, people who are designing the experience. I was fortunate over the last year and a half to create a new team. It's pretty unique in financial services, called experience design. All they care about is, what does it feel like when you're in the site? I've hired people from Apple, Google, Disney, MGM, and other places, who are just pure experts on designing a different experience on that side. So long-winded way of saying, we deal with a lot of big numbers. We have big organization around it, but they're all focused on the end customer.
Well, listen, we've come to the end of our show, unfortunately, because this is much more fascinating than I ever imagined. And certainly at the Latin Chamber, we want the Hispanic community to understand how safe banking is. And our relationship with Bank of America has just grown. And it's helped us. It's really helped us teach our community that this is how you bank. This is what you should be doing. It's safe. And you're helping me put that message out, David. I can't thank you enough. In closing, what's the last thing you want everybody to know?
Well, one, again, thank you personally, Peter, for inviting me and having me on your show here. I appreciate that. Two is, When people think of Bank of America, I want them to make sure they think that we are here to help them live the best financial lives they can. And we have a pretty deep treasure chest of resources, and we're putting them to use every day to make it better. We'll get better every single day. So that's it for me.
Well said, well said. Well, folks, there you have it. The most important thing, or one of the most important things to understand, is that there are resources. Bank of America is offering you resources. And now more than ever, those resources are very valuable to you, your family, and to your business. So please utilize it. With that, thank you for joining us. The LCC Virtual Luncheon brought to you by Bank of America. I hope you've enjoyed it as much as I have. We'll see you soon.
I had this whole vision of what my life was gonna be just from like looking through my little bedroom window, seeing the farm worker camps, and that I didn't want to be that. I didn't want to do that the rest of my life. But I also was looking at what my mom and dad were working so hard at all the time. I have to finish what they didn't finish. You don't know what you don't know when you're put into a different environment, and there's all these different experiences.
America's changing. America's changed. And there are communities, in the case of Hispanics, 55 million people. There are hundreds of thousands of potential young leaders in the new America. The need is extraordinary.
I started out when I came to DC thinking, what am I doing here? And I had a hard time navigating DC. I slowly realized that, you know what, I do belong. I do belong on Capitol Hill.
In many ways, Washington is the center of the world. So imagine these kids, they come from almost always families where no one's been able to go to even to college. And all of a sudden they're exposed to the center of the world, politically and corporately.
I'm not just Colombian, I'm also from the United States. I love this country and I love the culture as well.
You go out there, we're gonna get you this internship on the Hill, you're gonna work in a business environment. It's okay if you don't say something right. We're here to help you navigate that.
The new America is going to be the greatest of all Americas, but it needs leadership.
We all carry that same mentality that, you know what, we do belong, even though we may look different, we may sound different. It made me start to feel fearless.